I'm not saying only in America, but Americans seem to like charismatic, big figures that they can look to lead them. You know, and a lot of the prophetic movement prophesied the end of these structures. You know, the Kansas City prophets, John Paul Jackson, others prophesied the end of structures of hierarchy within the church, but they failed to embrace that in their own lives and ministries. So they ended up for being a self-fulfilling prophecy. Unfortunately, when you look back in the history and you see God will give an opportunity to change. And he gives that opportunity to embrace what he's doing. And when you embrace it, you change. If you resist it, it starts to put pressure on. And ultimately, you end up following your own understanding rather than following what God is saying. Because it's too challenging to change this system that you developed in your own ministry where you are at the top of the ministry pile. And it's very hard for people. You know, I had to let go of things. You know, when I was in a position where God was going to use me, I had to be willing to say, I'm handing this over. This is not mine. This is God's. Therefore, I don't need the leadership of this anymore. I'm going to give it to other people to lead this. You know, and I had to face those things. You plant something, you start something, you know, you are the founder of something, then it's like, okay, I'm giving this to someone else. But that's the problem. Some people stay on in positions that they should have left and moved on and given other people the opportunity to take things further. You know, you've got to be willing to realize this is not about me or any individual. This is about God and his kingdom. You know, and if our position is coming from and our identity is coming from what we do, then it'll be hard to let go of what we've developed. And a lot of people, I mean, I prophesied years ago when I was looking at the Joshua generation that many ministers had built their ministries in the wilderness. And God was calling us to cross over into a new whole revelation of church and a new wineskin, and that those who had built their things and their security was in their ministry and their finances was in their ministry, but their ministry was a wilderness ministry and was never intended. God did not say build anything in the wilderness. It was to establish it in the promised land. And ultimately, a lot of ministries have collapsed. A lot of people have ended up losing those positions anyway, because they rejected giving them up and changing and embracing the change that was coming, which is relational, non-hierarchical ministry and leadership. Leadership that serves, does not overshadow or oversee or cover people. Because as soon as you create a covering for people, people have to go to you. And then when those people collapse or fall, people are disillusioned. And sadly, that's what happens when these things take place. And I'm sure a lot of people are struggling right now, and we should, you know, be merciful and gracious to those people, because they are probably struggling with what's gone on and why has it gone on and how did it go on, and you know, all of those questions that come up at a time like this. Why didn't we see this? You know, and sometimes it's like, I don't know why God didn't show it, but he doesn't always. You know, we had in ministry, in part of our leadership team years ago, two people who were in an illicit relationship for years that no one ever knew until it came into the light. Then it's like, well, why didn't we see that all the way through? Well, some of it is, you know, you always want to think the best of people. So you don't want to be thinking the worst of people, but why didn't God just tell us? I mean, I was in an intimate relationship with God in which he was giving me stuff to talk about all day, every day. So why didn't he tell me that this person was in this relationship wrongly with another person? He didn't. Now, maybe because he wanted those people, or was asking those people, to open up and share and ask for forgiveness without being exposed, so that the responsibility was theirs. And eventually, one of these two people, they came clean because they couldn't cope with it anymore. And so they then asked for forgiveness and were restored and everything else, and received love and acceptance and weren't exposed to shame and everything else. But you sort of think, I think, well, God could have told me that 5 years ago and we would have stopped it happening. But actually, God isn't going to take away our choice. And when I look at prophetic stuff, whenever I was involved with prophetic ministries and people would be prophesying, I wanted them to prophesy what was really going on in my life and in my heart, because I was already aware of it. I knew the struggles I was going through at times. So I wanted them to be real and honest. They never were. None of them ever identified anything that was going on in my life. They prophesied some really nice things, but I would rather have said, look, God has seen your heart. He knows the struggles you're going through right now, blah, blah, blah. But he didn't. None of them did. Now, I don't know whether they saw it and were afraid to say it, or whatever reason. Actually, it just felt, maybe that's not how God does things. Maybe God doesn't expose people, but wants people to come to the truth and open that up for themselves rather than it being exposed. Because God is loving and gracious. He doesn't want to bring people into exposing if at all possible. But sometimes it's the only course when it comes to public knowledge. But when it does, we need to really be careful how we handle it with people, because it should be dealt with that person in private, with God and with their family or relationship, or all the other things that need restoring and looking after in that situation. It shouldn't be on Facebook or in the public domain like it tends to be, because I think that's not the way God does it. If you enjoy these videos, would you please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe? It really does help. Thank you very much.